Jack and Mark present part 1 of The History of Weather Forecasters, a highly contested and unknown historical account.
I understand you've been brushing up on the concept of weather and climate.
Yes, well, weather and climate's always on my mind because I fell asleep in the snow last week. I was almost put into stasis. Neighbor's dog came over and started licking on my face, and, well, he peed on my face, actually, if I have to admit it. I should have taken the weather into account when I got shit-faced and went out into the backyard in the wintertime to play croquet.
Well, I heard that your face was so frozen solid before this embarrassing incident that the local kids were using your face and your body as a croquet mound.
There's no respect these days anymore for kids. They don't have respect, though I did get on the front page of the Shoppers Drug Mart flyer.
It was right next to the Metamucil?
And Buckley's cough mixture. I actually got a royalty check in the mail because they had to use my image. And then I was rushed off to the hospital. They documented me and sent the results to Nassau because I went into a state of stasis, suspended animation. This is what they want to do. So people can put them to sleep and they can go to the distant stars like the first Planet of the Apes. They were all in suspended animation except for the one woman who
came out as a skeleton.
She wasn't looking good at all, but I seemed to fare a lot better. And it got me thinking about weather forecasting.
It's very important in the history of humans.
Oh, it is. They discovered these scratchings on a cave in the Sahara somewhere. They found these scratchings and drawings on the cave. They claim it's one of the first weather reports. They show a little stick man and he's pointing at a cloud. They think that he's predicting the weather because in the next picture on the cave wall, they show a bunch of people running after him throwing sticks.
For being wrong.
He got it wrong. Yeah, he got it wrong. But
I think in that diagram, they showed a thought bubble coming out of his head that was predicting rain.
It was also one of the first uses of thought bubbles. Thought bubbles are pretty important for the whole comic industry. All the first weather forecasts on cave walls were depicted with thought bubbles, but not language, no words in the thought bubbles, just a picture showing a picture thinking of a picture.
I had heard that they were only able to forecast the weather from the past.
The guys who predicted weather from the past, they were the ones who were correct most of the time.
People would sit down and listen to them. They'd gather around in a circle and he'd say, here's your weather forecast for the day. And then he'd say what it was 5 hours earlier.
They thought he was the scientist of the village and they gave him credence for a while, but then they caught on. And I think he was thrown into a ravine because they definitely wanted to know the weather a couple hours ahead.
Wasn't there a guy that was hit by lightning?
Frederick Sauce.
Not Frederick Fleeper from Bullgrots.
This is before Frederick Fleeper. They thought that he had been, of course, touched by a god. Remarkably, he survived, apparently. Then he was able to do remarkable weather predictions. Yeah, I think he was one of the first weather people. He would be so in tune to the charges in the air after that he was able to predict if it was going to rain 3 days in advance. And he was actually very good at it until he became an alcoholic.
In addition to being able to predict the rain, the electrical charges that had built up on his body from the lightning would attract the electrical charges from clouds, so he could move around and bring the clouds with him.
He became quite coveted in the village for that too, but he could only get a little bit of rain in a very tight space, basically about 1 meter around his own body. So he would have to stand in one spot in a field and then move on to the next spot and then move on to the next spot, and it was laborious. But then everybody wanted him to come by, and he became quite popular, and a lot of marriages got broke up because of him, because he was quite the womanizer. Get invited over to water some woman's garden, he'd do a lot more than just watering. The men in the village, they got pissed off at him. He's doing the rounds, he was so popular, and he had to flee. He had to run and hide. But do you think he could hide? No, they just had to follow the rain clouds. And he didn't really forecast weather, he just brought weather with him. That wasn't too hard. He knew what was going to happen wherever he went. And I think he was stoned for adultery.
Oh, and now tell me about the history of hurricanes.
They used to just blame it on anyone they didn't like. In the old medieval village of Strausberg, the cart maker, he was not all that popular because he refused to make his wheels perfectly round for his carts. So the whole wagon would kind of move up and down and throw all the produce out. Those were the days when there was only one wagon maker in town. People were always pissed off at him. And then a hurricane would come moving in and they said, well, let's blame that guy.
Wayfair Twister.
Yeah, that was his name, Wafer Twist. And when a hurricane came, they said, well, let's blame him because he's a dumb fuck anyways. And I paid good money for a wheel that's not round. They blamed him and they told him to stop the hurricane just for the hell of it, to see if he could. And then they could blame him for not stopping it because they just wanted to kick him out of town and have a good reason for it.
What had happened was they said, stop the hurricane. And eventually hurricanes stop on their own. When it did stop, they'd say, aha, see, you stopped it. You must have started it.
The logic wasn't too great in the medieval times.
Magma Carta was his name, the prosecuting attorney. He's the one who prosecuted the case against, what was the hurricane guy's name? They just called him Wafer for short.
Well, yeah, he was called Wafer for short. And then they forgot what his real name was.
They forgot what the long version was.
They just forgot it.
Magma Carta was prosecuting Wafer for short.
And he said, I accuse you of starting the hurricane. You tried to take credit for ending it. Therefore, you must have started it. And then everyone said, yeah, let's get rid of him. That dumb fuck doesn't know how to make a round wheel.
They said yes, but that is not relevant to the case because they were charging him with starting the hurricane, not making round wheels. Didn't Wafer for short say that's a bunch of bull fucking crap? And then Magma Carta asked the judge for permission to treat him as a hostile witness. So he threw a rock at him.
They threw a rock at him, and then he was sent to harass the neighboring village, which they always were in competition, and they figured, well, he's a hostile witness. Do something with your hostility, or we're going to put you in the pit.
Describe the pit for me.
It was about 5 feet across, 6 feet down, and it was full of rotting fruit, and that was it. But he could always climb out. It was only 6 feet.
They really hadn't developed any theory of dungeons.
They didn't have much of a logical judicial system. They were still living in basically mud huts. The court documents were scratched out on slate. 4 scratches meant A, and 3 scratches meant B, and 6 scratches meant E.
They just had 3 letters.
The court documents are open to interpretation.
What happened to the study of hurricanes? Like after they figured out it wasn't really Wafer for short, well after his death, when it didn't matter, who put the biggest emphasis on studying how hurricanes worked?
Winford Small. He was only 90 pounds, and he was obsessed with wind. His mother used to make him wear a large brim hats because his father died when he was young. And she said, you're the man of the house and your father always wore wide brim hats. So he would always wear this wide brim hat that was tied under his chin. And he was at age 6, swept up by a stiff wind and deposited 15 miles away from his village. And then he became obsessed with hurricanes.
Because a hurricane took him.
Yeah, well, that was just a stiff wind. He thought he was quite well suited for the study of hurricanes.
Well, hurricanes or just air movement in general?
Air movement in general. He was one of the first forecasters. And he had to decide whether it was going to be a windy day or a not so windy day. That was it. He didn't predict rain or sunshine. He just predicted the wind.
Didn't he get a bunch of chickens as a means of studying hurricanes?
Well, yeah, he did. And he would just put them out on the field and put wide brim hats on them because he said that worked for him. Since chickens couldn't fly, if they actually did start to fly, then he figured, well, that's a number 4 wind.
He's the guy who came up with the first wind classification system.